Economics, Standard 12, Unit 9, Public Economics continued. Let us learn today public revenue. Public revenue occupies an important place in the study of public finance. The government has to perform several functions for the welfare of the people. They include substantial amount of public expenditure, which can be financed only through public revenue. The amount of public revenue to be raised depends on the necessity of public expenditure and the people's ability to pay. So the amount of public revenue to be raised depends on the necessity of public expenditure and the people's ability to pay. The income of the government through all services is called public income or public revenue. According to Dalton, the term public income has two senses, wide and narrow. So according to Dalton, the term public revenue or public income has two senses. One is wide and another narrow. Wide and narrow. So in the widest sense includes all the incomes or receipts which a public authority may secure during a particular period of time. It is known as public receipts. It also includes loans raised by the government also. And another important one, the narrow sense. Narrow sense includes only those sources of income of the public authority which are ordinarily known as revenue resources. They are known as revenue resources. It is known as public revenue. It includes revenue resources. Now, the sources of public revenue can be classified into two: tax revenue and non-tax revenue. Sources of public revenue can be classified into two: tax revenue and another one is non-tax revenue. Non-tax revenue. So under tax revenue, what is tax revenue? Tax is a compulsory payment by the citizen to the government to meet the public expenditure. So tax is a compulsory payment by the citizen to the government to meet the public expenditure. According to Dalton, a tax is a compulsory contribution imposed by public authority irrespective of the exact amount of service rendered to the taxpayer in return and not imposed as a penalty for any legal offence. So tax is legally imposed by the government on the taxpayer. In no case, taxpayer can refuse to pay taxes to the government. A taxpayer cannot refuse taxes to pay to the government. And characteristics of tax also there. So characteristics of tax. So there are certain important characteristics of tax. A tax is a compulsory payment. First, compulsory payment. It's a compulsory payment and should be paid by the taxpayer to the government. And also, that is, tax is imposed and must pay the tax. Refusal to pay the tax is a punishable offence. Secondly, there is no quid pro quo. No quid pro quo. Quid pro quo. And remember, there is no quid pro quo and between a taxpayer and public authorities. This means that the taxpayer cannot claim any specific benefit against the payment of tax. A taxpayer cannot claim any specific benefit against the payment of a tax. Thirdly, every tax involves some sacrifice. Tax involves some sacrifice. Of course, it involves some sacrifice on the part of the taxpayer. And a tax is not levied as a fine or penalty for breaking law. Fourthly, it is not a fine or penalty. So a tax is not levied as a fine or penalty on the part of the taxpayer. Just remember also for breaking any laws. And some of the important tax revenue sources are income tax, corporate tax, sales tax, surcharge and cess. The important tax revenue sources are income tax, corporate tax, sales tax, surcharge and cess. Non-tax revenue. The revenue obtained by the government from sources other than tax is called non-tax revenue. The revenue obtained by the government from sources other than tax is called non-tax revenue. The sources of non-tax revenues are fees, fine, earnings from public enterprises, special assessment of betterment levy, and gifts, grants and aids and assets. So fees. Fees is important or another important source of public revenue to the government. A fee is charged by public authorities for rendering service to the citizens. Unlike tax, there is no compulsion involved in case of fees. For example, the government provides certain services and charges certain fees for them. The best examples are charging for issuing of passport, driving license and so on. So fees is the first important non-tax revenue. Second, fine. Fees is different from fine, fine is different from fees. Fees is not compulsory, but a fine is a penalty imposed on an individual for violation of law. So it's compulsory. For violation of law. For example, violation of traffic rules, payment of income tax after the stipulated time. All this they have to pay fine. So a fine is a penalty imposed on an individual for violation of law. Thirdly, earnings from public enterprises. The government also gets revenue by way of surplus from public enterprises. Some of the public sector enterprises do make a good amount of profit. The profits or dividends which the government gets can be utilized for public expenditure. So third one is earnings from public enterprises. Earnings from public enterprises. And fourth important is special assessment for betterment levy. It is a kind of special charge and levied on certain persons, members of the community, who were beneficiaries of certain government activities or public projects. For example, due to a public park or due to the construction of a road, people in that locality may experience an appreciation in the value of their property or land. So, special assessment of better levy. The fourth one is special assessment. And fifth important is gifts, grants and aids. A grant from, that is any country, from one government to another, is an important source of revenue in the modern days. Grants from foreign countries are known as foreign aid. Developing countries receive military aid, fund aid and technological aid from other countries. And finally, exceeds. So, grants, gifts and aids. And sixth one is exceeds. So, exceeds. So, what is exceeds? It refers to the claim of the state to the property of a person who died without, that is, legal heir or documental will. So that automatically a person who dies with property without legal heir or documental will, that property can be just taken by the government, and properties uses and the revenue received from the properties can be utilized for public expenditure by the government. So, non-tax revenues help for meeting of public expenditure by the government. So, we have learned tax revenue and non-tax revenue for meeting public expenditure by the government.